I hope, like me, you've found the wide variety of conversations today to be, thought provoking and scintillating, et cetera, et cetera. I've just gotten so much out of it, and I want to thank all of our panelists up to now for their great work, and thank you all again for being here. I also just want to thank again our sponsors and members, organizational members of our advisory committee, certainly first and foremost the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, which is this great space. And please, if you do get a chance, go and see their exhibits. They've done a lot of great work over the past year and a half on a lot of the two exhibits that are here right now, both the Moonshot exhibit as well as the Free Blacks exhibit in the other room across the corridor. Foothills Forum, Charlottesville Tomorrow, Virginia Tech, the University of Virginia, Virginia Public Media, Institute for Nonprofit News, Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO, Cardinal News, Dave and Ingrid Hang, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the PATH Foundation, Piedmont Journalism Foundation, American Press Institute, and the Jean Ann Foundation. If I've left anybody off, yell at me afterwards. So today's session is going to explore the connection between journalism, the humanities, and democracy. And with us are Margaret Talev, who is the director of Syracuse University's Institute for Democracy, Journalism, and Citizenship, and a senior contributor at Axios. She's an adjunct lecturer at Harvard's Kennedy School and was a resident fellow at Harvard's Institute of Politics. Her analysis is featured regularly on CNN, SiriusXM, and NPR. She's a past president of the White House Correspondents Association and the Washington Press Club Foundation, and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a member of the Board of Visitors for the Philip Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland, her alma mater. Our conversation will be moderated by Rishi Jaitley. Rishi is a professor of practice and distinguished humanities fellow at Virginia Tech, where he also leads digital transformation and scientific collaboration in the Academy for Transdisciplinary Studies. He is the co-founder and was founding CEO of Times Bridge, the United States' leading venture capital firm enabling international expansion for organizations such as Airbnb, Coursera, Headspace, Malaria No More, and Uber. Previously, he was Twitter's vice president for Asia Pacific, Middle East, North Africa, and the company's first employee in mainland Asia. He's a member of Virginia Humanities Board, which we're very proud of. So please welcome Margaret and Rishi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I was Twitter's first employee in Asia. I'm not sure if there are any employees out there anymore. I would start with that. But it's great to be here and great to see such a lovely turnout on such a warm day here in Richmond. Margaret, thank you for taking a few minutes to visit with us as well. I thought I would start with sort of trying to connect the dots between these words we've heard, these concepts we've heard: democracy, engaged citizen, journalism, even the humanities. Sort of tease out for us sort of the connections between these things. I know at Axios you spent a lot of time in the numbers, but I thought we'd start with establishing sort of a baseline before exploring some of these concepts individually. Thank you again.
Awesome. Thanks, Rishi. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Melody. Thanks to all of you. It is like it's warm. I'm sorry. I'm schwitzing up here. So the institute that I'm in the process of standing up right now in D.C. for Syracuse was basically conceived because folks from the chancellor and the provost down to the individual colleges level at Syracuse understand that there is a connection, right, between the health of American democracy and the health of American journalism, and that there are, journalism can obviously help address misinformation and show people what's really true. Sometimes journalism can drive the problem and help people to believe things that are untrue. These things are interconnected. In the case of Syracuse's new project, this institute is sort of a child of the two schools that are most closely tied at the university to journalism and to democracy, the Newhouse School and the Maxwell School. And the idea is to combine the research, the academics, and kind of our network of experts and public engagement to address the issues together. So that's kind of I mean, that's what drew me to the job. I think these things are completely interconnected, and that you cannot tackle one without tackling the other.
Yeah, and I think digging deeper a little bit around the relationship between democracy and journalism, and we've established today, and many of us sort of maybe self-evident to a lot of us, which way the wind is blowing on these themes, and some of that may not be good news. Is there anything uncommon or unusual or particularly intriguing you're noticing around the trends around these things? Journalism, civic health, political health, whether it's with your Syracuse hat or your Axios hat. Just curious if there's anything particularly unusual or striking.
Well, Rishi, I don't know about you. I certainly think January 6th was a wake-up call to a lot of people who already were concerned about polarization, misinformation, decline of trust in news, but didn't realize that it could culminate in, the tens of thousands of Americans saying it's, they want to take up and challenge the results of a completely legitimate election, and of millions of Americans continuing to believe, right, lies that an election was stolen when it wasn't. So I think as a result, you're seeing many universities start some version of a Democracy Institute or a Democracy Center and try to do it in conjunction with other parts of society, not just the university itself. I think this has just become a lot more of a common conversation. There's a proliferation of civics organizations, at least 100 civics groups nationwide, trying to figure out how to have better conversations with people. There's been a renewed interest in re-engaging at the high school level in civics programming. Things like groups that invite someone to dinner of the opposite party. Some of these are truly nonpartisan, some are bipartisan, some are partisan pretending not to be partisan. Some are national, some are very hyper-local. The challenge with all of these is that it's just throwing a lot of stuff at the wall and kind of seeing what'll stick. But connecting the dots, really doing something constructive with all these efforts, I think is the real opportunity. In the short period of time that I have been engaged with building this new institute, one of the things that has really struck me is the connection between people's personal sense of isolation or polarization and the national problem. And I'll tell you what I mean. I was asked a couple weeks ago to join with a colleague at Syracuse up on campus for a session on how to have difficult conversations. And the professor that I was doing this with, her expertise is in conflict resolution. That's her training. We weren't really sure who was going to come to this session, but we had free pizza, so we figured we'd get at least 5 people, maybe 1,000. We got 40 students and some faculty and staff. And to some extent, they wanted to talk about lowercase p political issues in society. We got a couple questions about affirmative action. How do you talk to someone who's against affirmative action, when you can see the case for it? Some modest discussion about, schools and what should be the role of school boards. But for the most part, the students wanted to talk about challenges in their personal lives that dealt with difficult conversations and interpersonal dialogue. One of the students had been going through a transition with friend groups, and she was trying to figure out how do I feel okay about having kind of broken away from a group of friends when I see them, and how can I be proud without being angry, or those kind of issues. Someone else was confiding about the challenges they were having because one of their parents had, I don't know how better to say it, had joined the QAnon conspiracy movement. And this person felt like they couldn't really have a relationship with their parent anymore. But then they were like, is that okay? Is that supposed to last for the rest of my life? Am I never going to talk to my mom again? Or is it temporary? How do I get my head around that? And it really connected with me that most people don't wake up every morning thinking about what the Roberts Court is going to do, or
Right.
Whether Kevin McCarthy is going to be able to do something with a debt ceiling. They're thinking about the stuff in their own moments of separation from things that they used to be part of, dissonance with a loved one over an issue that they just can't figure out how to bridge, or just sort of confusion about things that are going on in their own community, and that some of the ways that people used to solve for those problems, which is all of your family is in town, so you just talk to your aunt about it, or you don't know how to deal with your local school board, so you call the local paper and ask them what's going on. Like, these levers are not available in a society that where we kind of travel in smaller packs, live somewhere for a couple years and keep moving, don't have a local paper in our town anymore. My point is that these things are connected, and I think one of the opportunities of an academic institute or universities or local news groups is to get beyond the hard news story. This happened on Tuesday, and here's the quote, and here's the context paragraph, and to write about it, talk about it, convene conversations around how these macro issues and micro challenges are connected.
You know, if I used to work at the Knight Foundation 10, 15 years ago, and if my friend Alberto Ibargüen were here, the outgoing CEO of Knight, I think he would talk about the arts and the role the arts and humanities play in sort of as a prerequisite to the role they play in cultivating belonging, cultivating shared meaning, and that serves often in community as a prerequisite to sort of some of the more classic political civic engagement we speak of. You know, we're at an event sponsored by Virginia Humanities. Does that frame resonate with you? Is that what you're getting at when you're talking about sort of, you know, you host a conversation with students and young people ostensibly on sort of political journalism, save democracy issues, and there they are opening up about a lack of personal meaning in their life. Do the humanities play a role there? Am I getting this right? I'm just curious how you think about this.
I think they clearly do on two levels. And by the way, like, we're having this conversation where you're interviewing me because of your role on the council and because someone had to be the interviewer. But but like, I should be interviewing you.
Hey,
I mean,
no.
because I think your experience, your expertise is so valuable on this front. I think that the humanities and culture writ large matter for two reasons. And one is that if you say to the average person, hey, how'd you like to come out on Tuesday night and talk about democracy and journalism at some panel? They'd be like, thank you, I'd rather stick really sharp needles in my eyes. But if you engage them in a conversation that touches on those issues, but with something that feels more either fun or relevant to them or personally connected to them, I think you can kind of get more done, right? That sometimes the way you deal with an issue is not head on, but a couple steps to the side, right? So I think about, like, one of Syracuse's greatest strengths is we have a phenomenal training program for sports journalists, for students who want to come and cover sports, write about sports, talk about sports on TV, maybe do play-by-play, maybe cover the Olympics one day. The overlap between sports and democracy issues is endless. Can you think of, okay, Colin Kaepernick, Brittany Griner, Saudis and LIV golf, Qataris and World Cup, pay equity, racial diversity in coaches and ownership, women's sports versus men's sports, like, the issues go on and on. The assistance that professional leagues gave to making voting more accessible during COVID. So sports actually has played a role in expanding democracy as well. That's all real.
That's right.
Democracy is not just about capital E elections and capital P politics. It's about equity and access to upward mobility or innovation or power or change in your everyday life. It's not just about elections, although it obviously culminates in elections. So it's, number one, making the conversation more accessible, and number two, it is how the democracy and journalism issues, and by issues I really mean, like, the biggest issues in journalism include polarization, include misinformation, include lack of access, or a feeling that you have a lack of access. You know, if you talk to a lot of people about why they don't trust news organizations, they might say they're not covering issues that I'm dealing with, or they're not covering issues in the way that I'm dealing with them. They're not writing about things I care about, or they're not writing them in a way that resonates with me. So anyway, I think when you broaden the lens of what you're defining the challenges to democracy and journalism in, you're broadening the lens to some of these areas of humanities and culture.
Right.
I also think, like, if you think about the last couple of decades of real social change, like TV and movies and song and film were the drivers of so much of that, not just late night TV, but
right.
TV shows, movies. Somewhere between The West Wing and Veep is like how we got our modern understanding of how politics works. And I don't know what the post-January 6th version of it is, but there'll be another show at some point, right, that really tackles these issues. So again, a lot of people agree that they hate how polarized things are, that they wish that we could be more constructive as a society, and that the system wasn't so baked in, that Congress was dysfunctional. But when you ask them, well, what are you going to do about it? They're like, well, what do you mean, what am I going to do about it? That's for other people to figure out. And I think a way to have the conversation so that people feel that that they can address this in their own lives, and that they should, that things would be more effective if everybody figured out how they wanted to play a role, I think could be very powerful. And that's where the humanities and the arts and culture comes in.
Well, there's so much to dig into. It made me think of sort of this debate I have with folks around whether politics is downstream from culture or vice versa. We won't go there, but what you're getting at, which is the story of what we watch, the story of what we play, the story of what music we listen to, is the story of us too, in many ways. And a question I have for you related to that is, right, this notion of engaged citizen, this persona. And I'd love to hear from you what that persona looks like to you. In my career as a social entrepreneur, I would often imagine that engaged North Star, engaged citizen, sort of at 60 miles an hour. But what we had to do was narrate and meet folks where they are, and play back actually a civic identity to folks when they least expected it. Showing up to the local game was an act of civic engagement too, not just organizing politically. Just curious if you have kind of a portrait of engaged citizen that you'd like to offer our audience.
Yeah, no pressure there.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think it's two parts. It's what you consume and it's what you put out. And in terms of what you consume, one of the challenges that everyone in this room knows about, because there's so much research on it already, is that people gravitate to what feels comfortable to them, and also to what's free. It's harder to get, if you've got to get someone to subscribe, you really got to get over a hump with them. But people gravitate to the place that, by place I mean news outlet, that feels like home for them. And so the problem isn't that you like one network or one publication over the others. It's that you're not taking in enough of the other stuff. So I think a truly engaged person is getting information from more than one primary source. And in my work with Axios, I oversee the polling relationships that we have, and the research relationships we have, and probably our biggest partner is Ipsos. And we did a COVID poll for 3 years with Ipsos. It was an amazing poll, if I do say so. But early on, we saw that party ID was really important to predicting behavior. Is this what's the bigger threat? Is COVID a bigger threat, health-wise or economically? Are you wearing a mask? Are you socially distancing? How much trust do you have in Fauci, the president, whatever? We saw, and we're not that surprised, that party ID was a big predictor of behavior. But what we did not anticipate, and now it seems so obvious, is that sometimes an even bigger predictor of behavior was, what is your primary source of media? And what your primary source of media was highly predictive of how you dealt with COVID. And we ask Ipsos now, can we have the cuts on primary media for every poll we do with them? Because it is true beyond COVID in terms of how people think about every policy issue and how it impacts them, and whether they should be for it, and what they think about it, and what they think about society. We have another poll with Ipsos called the Two Americas poll. And the idea of it is to understand whether American society is moving closer together or further apart at any one time. And at the beginning of this poll, we saw there's basically a floor for togetherness, or maybe a ceiling, I should say, for togetherness. But that after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Americans actually moved measurably closer together because they realized there was a bigger threat than the other party in this country. And then a few months later, the Dobbs ruling happened, ending Roe v. Wade, and it moved right back apart, even more apart than it had been before, and it has never come back together after that. And so, again, this is not the only survey in America that shows that. So I think part of being engaged is getting enough information from enough places that you are not assured about things that are not really a sure thing. And then I think the second half is output. And you're right, it's not just about are you voting or are you an activist or do you go to a march. It's literally something as basic as, have you had dinner with someone from a different political party in the last month or year? This is another thing that we measure in the Two Americas poll. And what the survey finds consistently, and it sounds so stupid, because first of all, how could you not have had dinner in the last year with someone who's from a different political party? Like, does that resonate with anyone? You don't have to raise your hand. That's insane, right? But there are actually very large numbers of Americans who, when asked this question, say, nope, haven't had dinner with anyone who's different than me. And we ask different a lot of different ways. A different political party, a different race, a different religion. But people who say that they have shared a table of broken bread with someone who's different than them, however you define it, are much less likely to be polarized than people who have a sameness or a oneness about their social interactions. And the only way we measure it is at the table, but there's different ways to measure it if you're taking a walk with someone. We know that like a growing number of Americans, especially young Democrats, say that they would not date and definitely not marry someone of a different political persuasion than them. I think for many people in this room, it was common that one of your parents was a Democrat and one of your parents was a Republican. Many of us may have been drawn to journalism out of a desire to find a middle position. There was neither nor. So anyway, that's all changing. So you can be engaged by being super polarized, but if you want to be productively engaged, it is more productive to be open to spending time with people you disagree with, to be open to finding areas of commonality, even if you completely disagree with something that someone thinks. And the trends are moving away from that.
Love it. I got a couple more questions, and then we'll go to the audience. Let's get local.
Yeah,
and I know
let's do it.
you all,
Axios Local.
There you go. And I know you all at Axios launched in Richmond just about a year ago. And I'll kind of tee up the question this way. I'll again reference the Knight Foundation. I'm not on Knight's payroll, though, just FYI.
You should be, clearly.
But 15 years ago, maybe it's a little bit dated, but Knight and Gallup partnered on a really interesting survey of dozens of American cities. It was called Soul of the Community. And they studied to what extent civic attachment, very different word from engagement, leads to engagement. Civic attachment and civic engagement. And what they found, unsurprisingly, was that the more attached you feel to community, the more belonging you feel in its parks and museums and gardens and sports and entertainment, et cetera, the better your civic engagement outcomes are, not to mention other outcomes. As I think about Axios and your approach to local, the stories you all tell obviously transcend just political stories. Just reflect a little bit on Axios local, whether it's Richmond or another context, and what North Star are you all chasing? What are you learning in the context of this conversation?
It is actually about rebuilding communities, not just about rebuilding viable local news publications, although it is a business. I mean, it is that too. But it is about people have a yearning for connection. And in places, so I did take some notes. Is Penny still here? I don't know if Penny's still here, but Penny Abernathy's done some terrific research on this, and there's been others. Nancy Gibbs wrote about this for the Washington Post last year, but I think it's drawing on Penny's research. Newspapers are disappearing where democracy needs them most. 200 counties have no local paper now, and 1,600 have just one. And this is happening in a lot of the most polarized states where everything ends at the primary election. So that's the end of sort of the question about how does policy happen. Brennan Center did some work on news deserts. 50 million voting age citizens live in places with only one local paper. Half of those people live in places that have actively made voting harder in recent years. So that's really real. If you look at an Axios local newsletter, you'll see politics in there sometimes. Maybe not every day, but usually a couple times a week. But you'll also see like where to get a new taco, and you'll see stuff on apartment conversions and real estate, and you'll see things on someone whose name is breaking through locally or nationally or regionally. The mix of it, there's not a specific formula, there's not like a rubric for it, but the idea is that there are people who want to read about politics every day, and for them, we have political newsletters, right? But most people who want to read about their community every day want to read about their community, which is a mix of politics and business and development and connection and social stuff and bands that are in town and someone who wrote a play. And it is fomenting community. It's having a little bit of something, because when people, exactly as you said, when people live in a place, what they have in common with other people is that the other people also enjoy living in that place, right? And the first question you ask someone when you're at a concert or a sports event is not, who did you vote for last time around? Or did you vote? Or what's your favorite media source, you know? Some Axios stats. I actually checked in with the Axios Richmond folks because they are not here. And I was like, what should I share with this group? And two things. Number one, I told them there's a lot of local journalists from Virginia or around Virginia. And they said, if anyone here is interested in newslettering or talking about innovative ways to tell stories, like they'd love to connect with you. So feel free, you can either come up to me afterwards or email them directly or whatever, but that's on offer. But they said two things. And one is that people really like how short the stories is. So I don't know if Rick's still in the audience, but I sucked at emojis until I worked at Axios. I got better at them. Yeah, I love long-form journalism too, but the truth is most people don't read it most of the time. And so a format that allows you to read this much and then click if you want to read more actually works for a lot of people. You can read it while you're brushing your teeth or while you're in the bathroom. If you can read it in 5 minutes, you've read it, and you might not have otherwise. That really works. And the other feedback that we got from some of these folks is that Axios Richmond readers really like that mix, that it's not all politics or that it is not all, coverage of buildings, but it's kind of giving you a well-rounded package, like a cafeteria plate with like 6 little compartments, right? I say that with my Axios hat. Axios is in 28 local markets now around the country. 2 more coming online in the next short period of time.
Can you tell us?
I think I can. Can you guys unhear it if I wasn't allowed to tell you? Just whisper in my ear, just between, I think these have been announced, but Portland is right around the corner, and we've gotten a lot of questions about San Diego. That's happening, so.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. All right, my last-ish question for you is about your recent shift to higher ed.
Yeah.
Both of us have actually made moves in the last few months towards higher ed. What drew you sort of philosophically first to the higher ed platform and then to Syracuse in particular? Just sort of curious as someone who spent so much time on these issues.
January 6th. Is that like a smart brevity enough of an answer? It's,
Can I open the
yeah,
answer?
Yeah,
Okay,
you
go.
want more?
Yeah.
Okay. Look, I'm very grateful that both Syracuse and Axios have allowed me to also keep a relationship at Axios. I love journalism. I love being a journalist, and I wasn't ready to stop doing that. But the opportunity to build and launch a center that tackles these issues head on was just too important, I felt like, to pass up. And the reason why to do it at a university instead of in some other format is that I think this is a generational issue. I think I think there's value in talking to people in their 50s and 60s about why we can't all just get along better together. But I think the real break in people's expectations about how society is supposed to work or whether you should talk to someone you don't agree with. I think there is a real generational break on that line, and that this is something where part of your education as a student coming into the world should address these issues. And like universities do a lot of things. They do original research. We're doing that. This institute will do public convening and will involve more private convening with news leaders and things. But part of it is educational, it's for the students. And I have a 19-year-old. She and her friends like think differently about voting, about whether institutions work, about whether you should bother talking to someone who you disagree with, about whether you would live in a state that had policies that you disagree with, about whether you would take a job at a company. You know, they are different generational values, and I felt like, to me, the ability to not just talk to younger people, but hear from younger people and understand how they're thinking and how that is shaping this debate was really, really important. And the ability to do that at a university that was linking these two issues, democracy and journalism, was really important. Why January 6th? I mean, we all lived through it in our own way. Everyone here remembers where they were on January 6th. It was during the pandemic, and I was working from home because everybody was working from home. And two of my reporters were at the Capitol that day. One was in the House chamber when the guy with the horn hat and his friends were pounding on the door, and another was in the Senate chambers. And they both were locked down in the chambers and then escorted by, armed security out of there, and were right in the middle of it, and I couldn't reach either one of them for more than an hour. And you're an editor, yes, your job is to break news. Your job is also to protect and elevate the people, the reporters are working for you. And it felt so bewildering to be living through this moment. And we were all watching it on TV or following it on Twitter, or maybe some of you were there, that we had gotten to the point where that's how society fractured that day. It felt like that was kind of, I'm not gonna say it was 9/11, it wasn't quite, but it was in that kind of a category of a moment when the country's gonna change and be affected by something for a long time. And for me, I just felt like this is actually the thing I care the most about, and I've covered several election cycles, and I'm not gonna learn that much more by full-time managing the coverage of another election cycle. These are the challenges that I wanna focus on, and this was a way to do it. And I don't know if you were drawn for the same reasons, but this really is the thing that I wanna focus on. I think it is, other than AI, which is a very big challenge facing our country and our business, and other than climate change, which is an existential threat that the world is confronting right now, the polarization and the look, it's not just that people don't trust government or local news, it's that democracy and news are not working that well for a lot of people. There's a reason why they don't trust it, and some of it's conspiracy theories and social cueing, but some of it is just that the problems that society faces are complicated. Technology is moving very quickly. Our businesses have not kept up with the changes and the vastness of the problems. And if people don't feel they're being served and feel disconnected, okay, so they're not gonna trust, and they're gonna disengage, and they're gonna sort of choose off sides. I think it can't just be telling people, you need to trust stuff that's not working for you, and you need to read this or watch this because it's good for you. But it's a two-way street. We need to understand what people want and how to modernize our business and how to try to reach people with the truth where they are.
I appreciate that. You teed up many themes for future panels, but you also, during this conversation, you've surfaced things you've learned from young people, which is really awesome. For me, the many reasons why I transitioned, one of them, to use a kind of Axios frame, I've spent 20 years in digital and technology, and like a lot of people, you accumulate sort of smart brevity smarts, right? You sort of have spitball wisdom, right?
Life hacks.
Yeah, but this urge to learn and share long form. Actually, the irony of being at a news conference, I feel like my passion is around the role of the humanities. ought to play in answering what ails us in culture and technology and business and politics. So hoping to first learn about that at Virginia Tech, and then maybe we do this panel again in a few years and see how it's going. All right, we're going to take some questions from the audience. We're going to pass a mic around. We have a question right over here.
Love that. And for my end, if it's a question for me and I can't answer it, I promise to take your information and get back to you.
So my name is Emily, and I'm a junior at Longwood University, and I started an initiative last semester as a college Democrats president to get students to vote. I don't care who they vote for. I don't care if it's like Republican, Democrat, moderate. I do not care. I just want my peers to vote. And at the same time, I was working with the campus newspaper to make sure that information about voting was getting out, and that and through the initiative that I started. However, it was still so hard to get students to vote and actually turn out, and the amount of texts that I got the day, like election day, being like, oh, where do I go on campus to go vote? Like, I'm sorry, you can't do that. You have to go home. And they're like, no, I can't go home. So if we give them the resources in the newspaper, whether it be on campus or in the local town, and we start these initiatives to give them more information on campus through campus resources and departments, what else can we do?
Yeah. You want to tackle that first? You want me to take it?
I think you should go first.
Okay. Well, first of all, you confronted one of the great challenges of journalism, Emily, which is it our role to inform people or to get them to act? Right? And there's different kinds of journalism and there's different goals and it's different for every story. But just because you provide someone with information doesn't mean they're going to do the thing that you wanted them to do. And maybe there's not a thing you want them to do. Maybe you're just informing them to inform them. But in this case, you had a goal, which is to increase turnout. But you were confronted with the reality that even though you provided the information, people didn't really process the information. So I think when something like that happens, there's two things you can think about. And one is, could I present the information in a different way in my format, in the school newspaper or whatever? And then number two, it's, can I engage people in a different way? So you can take the data from what you've learned here, and if the most common problem was that people didn't realize that they either had to vote where they were registered, which was home, or they had to change their registration. If that's the biggest thing you learn from year one, then your experiment in year two is going to go a little bit different, right? Because that's what you'll be focused on. You're not going to be telling people where they can vote. You're going to be telling people the deadline to change your voter registration to the place where you're living now is X, right? Another thing that you can do is think about how you're reaching people. So you tried to reach people through the paper. But maybe if you had a forum with the head of the college Republicans next year and the newspaper, and all three of you got together and had free food or something, right? The third thing you can do is you can look at other campuses that have tried this before and hit a wall, the same wall. It's the same wall. It's like, oh, I had to do that last week? Darn, that's what always happens, right?
It's universal.
Right. So how are you reaching people? And as reporters, anyone who's worked at a paper or worked for a TV station thinks, and this is old line, right? It's not people who are 20 and are like, why would you work at a paper? Is that you're going to write something or produce a package and people are going to consume it. And then they'll act based on what they read or watched. But the reality is that news organizations have convening powers also. And it's not just about producing content and having someone consume the content. It's about facilitating conversations and actions. And I know you're like dual hat. You're the paper and the college Democrats, right?
Not anymore either.
You're neither now. Are you Are you out of school now?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm just doing the initiative.
The voting initiative?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. This is your full-time gig. Yeah. We'll do a session afterwards. I will connect you with people who can help you figure this out. But I think it's two things. It's number one, are you packaging the information in the most useful way? And number two, are people consuming and acting based on what you're packaging? Or do you want to be taking on a different role beyond just, here's stuff, read it? Is there a different way to get people? Are you Do you want to literally go door to door? Do you want to convene small groups? Do you want to have a buddy system where someone who's voted helps someone who hasn't voted? Like, you can play a convening role as well as an information role.
Awesome. I don't have an answer except just a reflection informed by your earlier comment about your interaction with students in Syracuse is sort of what else does this reveal, right? You know, when you see these kinds of things, is there another malaise that we need to work through?
Okay, can I just sidebar? We had this conversation.
We got lots
like,
of questions.
Oh, okay.
No, go. Let's sidebar first.
Okay, this will be very quick.
Sure.
We were talking about this outside, and I forgot we talked about it. When we did this session with the students who were worried about other things that had nothing to do with politics, one thing that we briefly talked about is the idea that if some public person who's dealing with some public issue just makes you feel furious, it can be really valuable to think about why you're feeling so furious and whether it's also about other things that started happening before, not just this one person. Not to take away from the infuriating person who I'm sure is an idiot, but to say that knowing yourself can be really helpful to helping yourself, and that as a news leader, being able to have those kind of conversations with the public, helping people find their own truths and connect their own dots is a real public value, I think.
Really well said. All right, we've got, I don't know where to point. We had a hand in the back that I saw early. Yeah. And then we'll go to this side.
Thanks, y'all. Forgive me for being a little academic, though I'm not one. Could you say more about what you mean by polarization and what is polarized from what?
It's a really good question, and it's an open-ended question, so I'll try, but I'd love to hear if you have some thoughts on this also. I mean, I think in general, polarization means that a situation where a group of people is turned away from each other with a gulf in the middle that's hard to bridge. And it can be polarization in terms of media habits. Certain, liberal Americans are more likely to only watch MSNBC, conservative Americans are more likely to only watch Fox, and the middle is this declining sphere. The middle, as viewed by TV news consumption, is broadcast outlets' nightly news programs, and that is a declining share. Actually, everything's a declining share, we know that. So, but polarization can also be that people of different races, religions, party affiliations, incomes, geographic regions, not talking to each other, not believing the same stuff, or actively talking to each other but disliking each other, active disagreement without a bridge. Polarization is just divisions where it's not just like, well, this is how I feel and this is how you feel, but where there is an anger or an unbridgeable quality as a result of it, and a distrust that accompanies it. I don't know, before we switch, what do you think it is? Did I miss something?
I wouldn't say you'd miss something. I think that's an unfair judgment for me to pass from the second row from the back. I have the privilege of being close to some researchers at the Center for Innovation, Technology, and Public Life at UNC Chapel Hill, and I'm thinking specifically of Daniel Karsh and Shannon McGregor.
That's great, yeah.
And they have deepened my understanding of polarization as polarization is a symptom of a deeper evil in society, and that evil in society is systemic racism, classism, gender discrimination, other evils that are, in fact, what create the feeling that if someone doesn't believe I'm fully human, of course I'm not going to be excited about having them in my house. So I ask that question in part because it feels like we are inheriting these symptoms and inheriting the behaviors that flow from deeper-seated problems that are systemic and horrifying and generational, as you already said.
Yeah, Daniel Karsh is an incredible researcher, and the work they're doing at Chapel Hill is awesome. And anyone who doesn't know who that is should Google him. It's really, really instructive and useful reading and work. I think that yes, systemic racism is a huge problem in the United States, and we've all just lived through one of the most profound kind of expressions of that over the last few years also. But the reality is many people are affected by that without realizing that they're affected by that. And if you, again, this is a head-on versus to the side issue. Telling someone you believe that because of racism may not be as effective as finding a different way to talk to people, right? It's like there are a lot of reasons for problems in society, but our challenge as journalists is to inform and communicate in a way that it can be received, so that the kids who you're telling to register to vote understand you meant register by October 11th, not October 20th. And so I just think some of us in this room may be focused on the why and on informing people about the why, and some may want to be more focused on just understanding how to reach audiences that are hard to reach, and both are important and both are valid. I don't know.
Appreciate that. Why don't we go to this side of the room, kind of back? Yeah, sure.
Sure. When you talk about polarization, it seems to me that it's sort of a value-free judgment when, in fact, if people believe that the election in 2020 was rigged, it seems to me there's got to be some value judgment there, particularly with the threat of authoritarianism in this country, too. I'm a little bit concerned about sort of a value-free judgment with regard to just brushing it off, not brushing it off, but addressing it as polarization. Could you address that concern relative to, I'm not saying some folks are right and some folks are wrong, but particularly with media sources, is it Fox and others, or is it more complicated than that?
I want to make sure I'm understanding the question.
Well, again, the polarization seems to be a value-free characterization of the problem in the country, when in fact, part of that value is some people don't believe that the election was fair.
Yes.
And they're wrong.
They're
right?
wrong.
Right. So how do you get past that, or how do you deal with that? Because, well, anyway, that's the heart of the question.
It is. It is the big question, right? I think, how do you tell millions of Americans who don't think that they have been misinformed that they have been misinformed? It's a real journalistic challenge. I think I think some people will be unreachable, and that's just a reality. And I think it's important for news organizations to tell people what's true, even if they don't want to hear what's true. I don't know the answer to the question. I think that part of the way we try different things is by listening to people and understanding, why do you feel the way you feel, and why do you feel the way you felt then? And then why did you feel the way you feel? And there are all kinds of efforts to do this with survey research and with focus groups. And it goes back to your question about sometimes these are embedded in systemic racism or systemic failures, and sometimes they're embedded in misinformation by the purveyors of the news. And anyone who's been following the Dominion lawsuit and wishing that it didn't settle so that we could have seen more can relate to that. And I just think, depending on what your role is in the news ecosystem, in some cases your role will be to really lean into that and tell those stories. And again, in other cases, if you're a local newspaper, your role is to communicate with your community every day about all kinds of stories, including things like that. You have to report and write what's true. But again, your challenge is reaching multiple audiences. And if you identify an audience in the community that is harder to reach because they don't believe what you're telling them, even though what you're telling them is true, then you have to decide, am I going to continue trying to reach this community? And if so, are there any ways that I can do outreach or convening that may make the conversation more productive? Where are you? What's your community?
I'm not a journalist.
Okay.
I've been an environmental advocate on issues of climate change.
And that's a challenge.
The issue of false equivalency is one that concerns me, because it took a long time for journalism to start to address the fact that climate change was a fact, and we're still seeing letters to the editor denying it.
No, look, I think false equivalency is a huge concern and something that everyone in this room should be aware of and not try to fall into. They're not always two sides. Sometimes there are 7 sides, and sometimes there are 2 sides and one side is wrong and the other side is right. And sometimes sometimes a fact is just a fact and it's not negotiable. Opinions are opinions and facts are facts.
Yeah, one of the things I'll just say before we go to the next question, and I'm not a journalist, but I think part of what you're expressing, it makes me think of, is that it's possible to, on the one hand, suggest that a characterization is false and let's not play false equivalencies, but it's also possible to chronicle to what extent all of that is a symptom of something else. Some of the most striking journalism I've seen is about what's happened in our culture since social media came, what sort of the opioid epidemic, what's happened to young men across America, and the darkness many young people live in. And I find it sometimes helpful. It takes digging deep to get to understanding, but maybe both can be true. Who knows?
I just think on the
Sure, yeah,
climate
go.
issue before we switch, generationally, there's a lot more bipartisan, across the board acceptance of the fact that things are warming and there are massive, terrible repercussions as a result of it. Like, this is a crisis. Young people now, this is much less partisan of an issue than it used to be. But having said that, like, as you're trying to reach an audience about climate change, the audience you most need to reach is the audience that most resists the truth. So I think, again, this is not to say that false equivalency is ever okay, or that it's okay to pretend something's not a problem because you're trying to capture an audience. That's not at all what I'm advocating for. But what I'm saying is, again, if you're, when you're trying to communicate facts that empower communities to everybody, oftentimes the community that would most benefit from being reached is the one that is the most resistant to it. And so whether you're a journalistic communicator or whether you're an advocate and you're trying to communicate, part of the challenge is thinking, how do I reach people who are the hardest to reach?
Take one more question from this side, maybe right here. So, just pointing at random, apologies.
So Jefferson said that a successful democracy depends on an informed electorate. And it seems to me that to truly be informed, you need to be able to look at both sides of a key issue and understand both sides of a key issue. And the polarization that you've all described, people are no longer willing to look at both sides of an issue and are in their own echo chambers on both sides. And it seems to me that journalism is failing to provide a forum where both sides of an issue can be adequately presented so people can make up their own minds about it. Why is that?
What do you think?
I think it is failing. So,
what do you think would look like an example of not failing?
Well, not failing would be to have, I guess, the equivalent of a debate where you have a pro and a con, whatever, presenting their sides of the issue, either video or in print, so that people can say, okay, I understand where they are, and now I'm going to come up with my own point of view. And you just don't see that happen very often.
Can you give me an example of an issue in which there could be the both sides thing?
Sure. Climate change.
Okay. And how many reporters in this room, or anyone in this room, agrees with this construct? And how many disagree with this construct? And how many, okay, and how many aren't sure? It's me, right?
You're the political journalist.
I don't know.
What would be the two sides of?
Right.
Well, in terms of addressing each of the issues, like the actions that you would need to take and the impact of those actions. And I'm not trying to pick a side one way or the other, but there are good, well-thinking people that really believe on both sides about the things that we should do, the investments that we should be making in EVs, for example, and the impact on the climate for having to mine the rare metals and all the other impacts.
By both sides in this case, okay.
Just don't get handled, I don't think, adequately to create an informed electorate. That's my.
So if I understand what you're saying, you're not saying that there are two sides to whether or not climate change exists. You're saying that there
Two
are
sides to a policy issue.
there are
But
two
the
sides to
things
how
that
to
make sense
respond to the
it.
challenges of
Yeah,
climate change.
right.
Right. Oh my God, that's AI at its best.
Yeah, that's fascinating. ChatGPT on the panel.
don't know if I can do better than that. I appreciate the question. I actually think that what journalists at the national and local level are constantly trying to do, literally every day about everything, is to try to figure out how to encapsulate the debate, what the debate is about, while grounding the conversation about that in the truth, as best as the truth can be approximated. You can have an argument about what's the right balance of pursuit of environmental protection against the economic needs of a community. But I don't think you can have a debate about whether or not temperatures have changed or water flows have changed, right? I mean, facts are facts. And so when you are having a debate about different sides of an issue, that can be about different sides in terms of how to respond or in terms of what the policy prescription is. But it can't, the two sides or the multiple sides can't start from a different set of facts. And I think that's the real challenge of journalism. One of the reasons why it's hard to have the conversation about the multi-sides is that in today's environment, people are often choosing to consume from one source, not from multiple sources.
Well,
Chambers are active.
but people participate. But people participate in the echo chambers. I mean, so I don't know. Is that the news organization's fault? I've always worked for news organizations that have sought to strike a middle position or no position, like, you know, just to be the arbiters of fact, not to come at it from an ideological point of view. So this is a complicated conversation for me to have, because maybe your point is news organizations should never be ideological, then we could always just be talking about the facts. But that's not, I mean, look, it's the First Amendment, and you can have a point of view and still be a journalistic organization. But it is one of the central challenges, is why we're all here, it's why there's an institute, is how to convince people that there are merits in listening to what someone from a different point of view has to say. I mean, the issue is not to say that polarization just exists in some kind of a vacuum, and I don't know why people feel differently. Like, yes, there are reasons why people are polarized, but it's to say, if there is more sustained encouragement of the value in listening to people with whom you disagree and trying to understand why they feel the way they feel, and trying to find a space where you can be talking to them about why you feel the way you feel, it is more likely that there can be more commonality in the country. It's very complicated stuff. I agree. I don't know what the answer is.
A couple of quick things, and we'll have to take our last question. One is, you know, the long tail of media fragmentation is here to stay, and some would argue that the 20th century was the anomalous century, meaning our media environments in the long arc of human history has always been fragmented. And so what we ought to be doing is thinking about what exists underneath all of us as media citizens, and the capacities and sensibilities it's going to take all of us as literate media citizens. The other thing I'll say, we were talking about this before, but just audio storytelling, and podcasts in particular, as an intriguing stage on which sometimes longer form nuance shows up. And we'll just sort of plant that seed here for the audience. Innovations, et cetera.
Before we go, can I just also say this? One of the things that the institute that I'm working with is really seeking to build is opportunities for convening news organizations. So if you guys have thoughts about a program you want to start, a public dialogue you want to try, a forum for people of different views coming together, any of those kind of things, like, please stay in touch. We are in the middle of shaping and fundraising and structuring, like, what we want our role in the community to be. And I'm very interested in your ideas as we do that.
Well, I did get the red light, so I think we're going to have to stop it there, unfortunately. But Margaret, this was great. There were a lot of uncommon insights here, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. So I can't get this thing to work.